Hello and welcome to our Energy into Uncertainty webinar series. In today's program, it's a tale of two mindsets. So if you're here, hopefully you're looking to gain some insights that'll help you build the capability of your individual leadership skills to execute and lead others more effectively. So this content builds from our well-received Energy into Uncertainty series. And we're sharing some case stories of what it takes for your organization to put energy into uncertainty and better manage your innovation, growth, and execution capabilities. So in today's session, we're going to share some tales of the organizational mindset that helps drive out uncertainty. And so the stories that we'll share today during our time together will provide an overview of the steps client teams are actively taking to drive energy into uncertainty from their current business situations. And the intent of this is to help you craft a strategy that's focused on solving long-term customer challenges and focus on your growth individually as a leader and how you might lead a team or an organization and how you'll solve customer challenges as well. So welcome everyone. My name is Jon Washington. I'm founder and proprietor of the Innovation Garage. Our company was founded in 2012 and our mission is to help provide education tools, tech, and expert consulting, helping organizations build their capability for growth. And we do that in 4 areas. So we help support organizations to innovate in their organization life cycle. We help them accelerate and bring products and services to market, so help increase the velocity to deliver products and services faster. We also support them in their execution, so the project and program management principles, methods, and approaches that will help you commercialize and get to market faster. And then last but not least, we also work with organizations to help them amplify the capability and abundance within their supply chains. Now, organizationally, when we work with others, we can work in a few different work streams. We can design and teach programs to build capabilities. So this is working with your executives and employees on how to lead and manage teams. This can start with strategy development, alignment, and execution for long-term growth. So these programs can run from half a day to 6-month cycles of learning, from front end of innovation to supply chain operations. And the sessions can be provided with optional certifications from executive to board level to frontline operator. We'll also work with organizations on projects for growth, help external collaborators with your internal teams, and help create a disruptive product, process, or service or supply chain. One of the outcomes of this type of activity is helping to build your culture of growth. And so these, through the education provided, the custom designed programs, alignment, tools, and technology, we can help build the capability of your team. And this is how people will engage with each other, how they'll create, and this will help enable your long-term culture of growth. And then lastly, if you need some professional solution development support, we can put together a professional development team to take a product, process, or service from the early ideation phases all the way through supply chain modeling and scale. Now, we work with a number of education collaborators, and these sessions are sponsored with our partner Baldwin Wallace University, specifically the Professional Development Group and the Center for Innovation and Growth. So we have a great collaboration with Baldwin Wallace, and we really appreciate the opportunity to meet with you at this time and share this content with you. So we hope that the next 20 minutes or so is very good and educational for you, and then you learn some things about yourself and may have some interest in attending a future program. So first, we want to talk about the concepts of mindset, and there's 2 different types of mindsets that we see within organizations. This is simple to explain, simple to understand, but very, very difficult to put into practice. And so these 2 concepts are growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And in the scenario of growth mindset, this is really thinking about things with abundance. We can look at a situation and recognize that we may have a challenge, a problem to solve, a new idea to create, something new to do. But we can look at that situation and we will find a way or make a way. And we will be able to move forward no matter what. We will find the solution, we will find the people, we will connect the dots, we will figure it out, and we will make it happen. That's abundance mindset. Another mindset is fixed mindset, where it's less. This is all we have. This is all we are capable of. These are the constraints we have. There is no way that we will get out of this current situation, because this is our lot in life, in one way to think about it. Now, a question we get asked quite a bit is, well, it must be obvious then that a smaller organization is much more nimble, they can move quicker than a large organization, because there's so much intricacies in those large publicly traded organizations. So it must be very difficult to have a growth mindset in a large publicly traded organization. And the reality of that is, it depends. We've seen large global publicly traded organizations with 15 to 20,000 employees that have a growth mindset. We've seen small startups or small mid-market privately held organizations with 20 to 40 people that have a fixed mindset and they're stuck. The key there is, what is the mindset of the individual team members? How do they interrelate with each other? What's the leadership mindset? Is it growth or fixed? Will they enable others? So the reality is, it depends on the organization, and it depends on the leaders, and it depends on the culture. Now, in order to kind of peel this back a bit and talk about growth mindset versus fixed mindset, we want to lay a foundation for you. And this foundation is thinking about creativity and how we are creative, but there's been kind of a challenge for us, and that perhaps is how we were educated. The creativity was taught out of us. And one of the best examples and explanations of this concept is from Sir Ken Robinson. And Sir Ken has one of the most viewed TED Talks in the history of TED, and it's about 65 million plus views. And so listen to Sir Ken when he starts to lay some foundational understanding of mindset and what's necessary for us to move into a growth mindset.
When my son was 4 in England, actually he was 4 everywhere, to be honest. I mean, if we're being strict about it, wherever he went, he was 4 that year. But he was in the Nativity play. Do you remember the story? No, it was big. It was a big story. Mel Gibson did the sequel. You may have seen it. I don't know. It was Nativity 2. But James got the part of Joseph, which we were thrilled about. We consider this to be one of the lead parts. We had the place crammed full of agents and T-shirts. You know, James Robinson is Joseph. He didn't have to speak, but do you know the bit where the 3 kings come in? They come in bearing gifts, and they bring gold, frankincense, and myrrh. This really happened. We're sitting there, and they, I think, just went out of sequence. Because we talked to the little boy afterwards and said, you know, are you okay with that? And they said, yeah, why was that wrong? They just switched. I think that was it. Anyway, the 3 boys came in, little 4-year-olds with tea towels on their heads, and they put these boxes down. The first boy said, I bring you gold. And the second boy said, I bring you myrrh. And the third boy said, Frank sent this. What these things have in common is that kids will take a chance. You know, if they don't know, they'll have a go. Am I right? They're not frightened of being wrong. Now, I don't mean to say that being wrong is the same thing as being creative. What we do know is, if you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original. If you're not prepared to be wrong. And by the time they get to be adults, most kids have lost that capacity. They have become frightened of being wrong. And we run our companies this, by the way. We stigmatize mistakes. And we're now running national education systems where mistakes are the worst thing you can make. And the result is that we are educating people out of their creative capacities. Picasso once said this. He said that all children are born artists. The problem is to remain an artist as we grow up. I believe this passionately, that we don't grow into creativity, we grow out of it. Or rather, we get educated out of it.
So Sir Ken has some great observations in his TED Talk, and we encourage you to watch the full version that runs about 20 minutes. But some of his takeaways are as follows. We don't grow into creativity, we grow out of it. or rather we get educated out of it. And the other is, if you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original. Well, these are great things, and these are great things that help provide us a foundation of some creativity and also a bit about growth mindset, right? His comment about if kids don't know, they'll have a go. As we get older, we are less and less and less desirous of, well, we don't know that, so we're not going to do that, or we're not going to have that experience. And so we talk a bit about the organizations that we work with and what we see is most effective in trying to understand and migrate to a growth mindset. Well, it's really important to think about an anchoring type of psychology. And so this is based on strengths approach and positive psychology. So as we learn about what Sir Ken says, right, mistakes are one of the worst things that we can make. That's kind of what we're taught. With the strengths approach, we really want to look at our team members and we want to look at our folks within our organization and even within ourselves and think about, well, what are our strengths? What are the things that I do well? And how do I get myself in situations where I do more of those things that I do well? If I'm able to put myself in those positions and get those types of assignments or do those types of activities that I enjoy doing and I'm good at, I will be very effective. And so the contrast here is what typically happens in most organizations with assessments is we get a list of our weaknesses. And here are the 10 things or the 15 things that are weak, right? And so that immediately puts us in a focus on our weaknesses. And I'm not strong enough to do certain things. Well, it's really easy for us as well to notice how people are different from us because of cognitive biases and then to focus on what they lack. So they may not have this certain skill that we have, or if everyone was just like us, boy, wouldn't life be great. So if someone's highly organized, they can look at someone else who's disorganized, but it could be that that person that is more disorganized turns out to be very creative or a good problem solver, or relates well to others. Someone who's highly analytical may identify that there's a coworker that just doesn't think the same way that I do, and maybe they'll ignore their ability to think strategically and be able to think beyond what's in front of them. So this measurement of talent and focusing on strengths is really important to help create positive psychological potential. And this is a key for growth mindset. How are we going to create a positive psychological environment for our teams? And so if you're able to make people aware of their strengths and their talents by providing some measurement and feedback, you place them in a position where they've got a really, really strong position to view their potential and how they can contribute to the organization. Then what happens is they can begin to integrate their awareness of their talents and strengths with a desire to improve areas where they may not be as strong, and they can continue to develop in areas that isn't a foundational strength for them. So this study, Positive Organizational Scholarship by Cameron, Dutton, and Quinn, is a really, really great study to immerse yourself into just to understand the importance of strength-based psychology. So now this can take us to what can be a logical question, a logical next question. What makes a good innovator? Well, there are 5 characteristics that make a good innovator. And this comes from a 2013 Harvard Business Review article. But these 5 characteristics play themselves out time and time again as we work with the different organizations that are part of our client portfolio. So this can be small startups, large publicly traded organizations with lots of organizational complexity, government organizations like the U.S. military and the U.S. Navy, and then also mid-market privately held, family businesses that have been around for 30 or 40 years, founded by craftsmen, founders, and now being transitioned to others to scale and grow and kind of continue on. So these 5 characteristics. First, innovator has an opportunistic mindset. They're able to identify gaps in the market. They can see and they seek out opportunities. They're pre-wired for novelty. They're very good at understanding, wow, that seems very unique and very novel. The other aspect of folks like this is they're very, very creative, but you may see higher rates of attention deficit. So they will have a high degree of focus on something for a short period of time, and then they'll move on to something else. But this is very characteristic of founders and those that are good innovators. Second, they've got formal education and training. So most successful innovators are not dropout geniuses, but they're pretty good trained experts. So they've studied their craft and they've honed their craft. And without this expertise, they're not able to distinguish between relevant and irrelevant information. And so this also says as well that they want to continuously improve. So leaders will likely invest in their teams and get them training to build skills and capability in areas where they need those skills and capability to grow. The third thing that's important and makes a good innovator is they're very proactive and they have a high degree of persistence. You'll learn more in our time together about this degree of persistence, or their grit, their grittiness. How do they stick to things and how do they finish them? They're more driven, more resilient, and typically more energetic than their counterparts. Now, they are not ones to jump out of an airplane without a parachute. They do have a healthy dose of prudence. And so contrary to what many people think, successful innovators are generally pretty organized, they're cautious, and they're risk averse. They will take smart business risks, but they will think about it before they do it. And then lastly, they have a high degree and a high capability for social capital. This means their ability to integrate with others, network, and do things that are meaningful and bring others to the situation to help improve. And so they look at diversity and kind of different types of insight to help them in that context. So those are the characteristics of a good innovator. And so, well, if you look at these and you say, well, what's going on in the innovator's brain, and how do we think about growth mindset versus fixed mindset? We want to explore an area what we call cognitive psychology. This is a field of study that explores our mental processes. And so cognitive psychologists, who are sometimes called brain scientists, study how the human brain works, how we think, how we remember, and how we learn. And they apply physiological science, psychological science, to understand how we perceive events and make decisions. And one of the key things that they'll talk about now, and as technology is evolving, they're able to understand different things within the brain, different areas of the brain as to what they do, and different areas of the brain that light up. And they can also start to identify the type of mindset that we might have. And so there's key differences and takeaways from this. So as we think about psychology and neuroscience, there's different learning styles that everyone learns differently. Some are learn to do's, some are do to learns, some want to argue, learn through argumentation. Others are very much context-based learners. They want to experience, interpret, and then relate it to what they already know. Now, one of the key things that's important to understand is as we teach skills about growth and mindset and grit and perseverance, it's important to understand, back to cognitive psychology, how our brains work. And the concept that we'd love to introduce to you today is helping to understand how can you make a transition from a fixed mindset, remember, limited capabilities, limited capacity, limited abundance, to a growth mindset, an abundance-based mindset. And we need to understand the concept of neuroplasticity. So this short video from Centis will be helpful in that context, and we'll talk briefly about some takeaways from this.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well travelled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep travelling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
All right, so there's some great insight about the concept of neuroplasticity. And the ability to rewire our brain is focused on a couple of things. First, we have to make an action, an active change, a change decision that we're going to learn a skill. And a way that this replicates itself, and you can kind of understand this a bit, is if you've ever tried to learn a musical instrument or do something that required some technical skill and some motor skill, with your hands or whatever, if you're learning something like this. So if you're learning to play an instrument, whether it's drums or piano or guitar, there are certain patterns that you have to practice as a drummer, certain chord shapes as a guitarist or as learning piano, and your hands and fingers have to form a certain shape before you can make the chord, or you have to move the sticks in a certain fashion to create a pattern. And the reality of it is that your brain is not wired to do that, so you'll struggle with those types of things early on. You have to think about, all right, to move to this chord progression, I have to shape my fingers in this fashion, and you have to practice that. So there's a lot of things that go into that before you're able to do that effectively. And that's kind of the concept of neuroplasticity, is that we have to make an active decision to change, and we have to practice that. And once we practice that, what's happening is, and this is why it's painful, is that you're actually carving a new neural pathway in your brain. And it takes time and repetition to get there. So this is a very, very important concept, that if we feel that we're very fixed in our mindset, or our organization is very fixed in their mindset, what are we going to do to kind of flip the coin and get to a growth mindset? Well, we've got to make that active decision that we're going to make a change. We've actually got to have some skills and things to practice. And so this plays out as we think about growth mindset within the organization and the delivery of innovation and growth systems. And no matter what we're doing with an organization, things that are important here. So it's very important from a leadership perspective to kind of have that mindset, right? We've got to think about, how are we going to grow this situation? How are we going to do something different? We've got to have reinforcing behaviors, all right? How are we going to have mechanisms to recognize that maybe I'm heading down this path as a leader and I'm very fixed and I'm not thinking as open and as freely and as growth-minded as I should be? And what are the daily actions that I'm going to do? When someone comes up to me and says, hey, I've got this great solution, or we have this problem, what is my response? Is my response, interesting, let's go figure out how to solve that, or that's awful, that's terrible, how could you make such a mistake? So this is really, really important in building the kind of collaborative culture that you want to have. And we've got to catch ourselves in what our responses are going to be in a certain situation. Now, this also then perpetuates itself in thinking about strategy and life cycle curves within the organization. The stories we tell each other, what are the narratives that we have? What are the constraints in the way? What are the exclusions, the things that we're not going to do? The things that are important for us? What are the areas that we're going to explore? And then with innovation tools, we're able to drip in some things that'll help you build this out and kind of build into the way that you think about systems. You can work backwards from the customer and a bunch of different tools that will help you there. So to explore this concept of growth mindset and grit a little bit further, we want to introduce another speaker, Angela Lee Duckworth, who did a recent TED Talk at TED Education, and she talks about growth mindset and grit.
In the New York City public schools. And like any teacher, I made quizzes and tests, I gave out homework assignments. When the work came back, I calculated grades. What struck me was that IQ was not the only difference between my best and my worst students. Some of my strongest performers did not have stratospheric IQ scores. Some of my smartest kids weren't doing so well. And that got me thinking. The kinds of things you need to learn in 7th grade math, sure, they're hard. Ratios, decimals, the area of a parallelogram. But these concepts are not impossible. And I was firmly convinced that every one of my students could learn the material if they worked hard and long enough. After several more years of teaching, I came to the conclusion that what we need in education is a much better understanding of students and learning from a motivational perspective, from a psychological perspective. In education, the one thing we know how to measure best is IQ. But what if doing well in school and in life depends on much more than your ability to learn quickly and easily? So I left the classroom and I went to graduate school to become a psychologist. I started studying kids and adults in all kinds of super challenging settings. And in every study, my question was, who is successful here and why? My research team and I went to West Point Military Academy. We tried to predict which cadets would stay in military training and which would drop out. We went to the National Spelling Bee and tried to predict which children would advance farthest in competition. We studied rookie teachers working in really tough neighborhoods, asking which teachers are still going to be here in teaching by the end of the school year. And of those, who will be the most effective at improving learning outcomes for their students? We partnered with private companies asking which of these salespeople is going to keep their jobs and who's going to earn the most money. In all those very different contexts, one characteristic emerged as a significant predictor of success. And it wasn't social intelligence, it wasn't good looks, physical health, and it wasn't IQ. It was grit. Grit is passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Grit is having stamina. Grit is sticking with your future, day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years, and working really hard to make that future a reality.
Now, take the opportunity to watch Angela's talk and dive deeper in that. So we've summarized a bit of what she talks about here in this graphic. So when we think about growth mindset, we've got to make that transition from being fixed, that we have limited capacity, we have limited ability, we're just stuck, to how are we going to grow, right? What's the abundance that we have? So there's a combination of three things that are really important. The first one, and this goes back to kind of that growth focus, and you think about the innovator and the social network, is the social skills. How are we able to engage with others? How are we able to relate with others? And how are we able to kind of build a social network? The next thing that's important is really our learning strategy. So what are we going to do as an individual to learn and improve? Now remember, we have strengths. We want to amplify those, and we want to continue that. And we also need to recognize what skills do I need to get that will help me learn and grow. And the third component is this grit piece. That's our ability to stick through things. And so with that, these components, we need to identify and model the behaviors, right? So we need to show how we can be socially engaged with others. Here's how we're going to learn, and here are the things that are important. And we're going to persevere and stick to it. And if we model those behaviors, we're going to get to improved performance. So this graphic helps define a bit about mindset and neuroscience, that if we need to migrate into this, we've got to create some new neural pathways. And so this is a way to kind of do that and approach that. Now, as we think about that, the question becomes, well, all right, now if I've got an understanding of I need to modify my mindset, maybe I'm very fixed in my thinking and I want to move to a growth mindset, how am I going to scale this and lead others? So we talked about those things about modeling behaviors. And the best study that we found on this was done by Google, and it was an article that appeared in Inc.com about Google's discussions and their thoughts about how to create the perfect team. And what it's not, it is not getting all the A players into a single team. What it is getting people together that have skills and strengths that complement each other, and making sure that the team members are dependable, they've got a good structure and clarity about their goals, the work and the activities have meaning to them, they have an understanding of the impact that it's going to make within the organization. And lastly, and most importantly, is the creation of psychological safety. So remember back to Sir Ken's discussions about one of the worst things we've been taught is making a mistake. So you have to work with your teams to create a psychologically safe environment. And so this is a place where everyone is safe to take risks, voice their opinions, and ask judgment-free questions. And so you can do this and create a culture where managers provide air cover and they create safe zones so employees can let down their guard. That's the definition of psychological safety. Very, very important for innovation and growth. Very, very important to migrate away from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. Now, Google found the teams that were psychologically safe in those environments had employees who were less likely to leave and more likely to harness the power of diversity, and ultimately they were more successful. Now, what does this look like within the organization? So this is that execution part, and it's hard. It's very difficult to do. If you want to get increased results, you've got to apply effort. So the graphics that we're showing show the y-axis of results, the x-axis of effort. We start to think about, wow, I want to move from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, and I want to get some results. So early on, there's this positive intrinsic motivation that helps us learn and be more effective. And we start to get results, and we start to progress, and we start to behave a little bit differently. We think about things a little bit more abundance focused. And that will continue, and it will plateau at some point, and then it will go into a dip, and you're going to regress. And we've got to apply more effort again. And so we're going to grow some more. And we're getting to a point where we'll reach a breaking point. And we just can't go any faster, any better, any stronger. And so we're going to get into a reconstruction mode and a recreation mode. And in that phase, this is where we go inward. We know what we're doing isn't working today, but it's a blind spot. So we'll step back and focus on reinventing ourselves and our strategies. And the big secret here is this never stops. There is a no arriving, so it's a constant game of hitting a dip, growing, hitting a wall, recreating, and growing again. So that's a big takeaway here, is that when we want to focus and change a mindset within ourselves, the teams we lead, and others, it continues and it goes on. So once you recognize that this is a continuous thing and it's going to move on forever, you can get pretty effective at it. So in takeaway and summary, so here's 4 keys that are helpful for growth mindset. So first off, talk about the concept of neuroplasticity with your teams. Think about that concept. How can I carve new neural pathways in my brain to learn a different skill and focus on different strengths that I have? Number 2, celebrate mistakes. If you celebrate the mistakes that are made, that's going to help you focus on growth. Problem discovery within your organization needs to be celebrated. If you find a solution to a problem before a customer experiences it, that's worthy of a celebration. So fail fast and fail forward. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Create that psychologically safe environment. Number 3, highlight micro progress. Award effort and progress and not skill. So when we think about effort, if someone's persevering and they're demonstrating grit against a challenge and they're making progress, award effort that they're putting into that. Not necessarily the person that has the skill to do that, but it's those that are putting in the effort and driving the progress. The 4th thing is sometimes called, get in tune with your alpha instinct. And this is a servant leadership type of mindset. Learn about growth mindset. Figure out how you can be more growth focused just in your own thinking and thought patterns. Model those behaviors and then encourage others. So in kind of closing today, we want to talk about this quote from Donald Hebb: neurons that fire together wire together. So if you're able to understand the psychological components of mindset and grit and neuroplasticity, you're able to work on that individually, then you can kind of perpetuate that with your teams and how to improve your leadership skills with others. So we appreciate you making time to join us today. We have a couple of upcoming live virtual programs. This will kind of define what live virtual program is. We take what is typically a one-day program live, and we break that into 2-hour segments over a 3-day period. So we do this via Zoom platform, and we walk through the digital content and the workshop content over a 3-day period. So our next session is about Innovation 101. If you want to learn the basics of some innovation tools that will help you take this mindset and give some active skills that your teams can use and build, check that one out. That's October 13th through the 15th. And it comes in 2 components. There is the online class only, and then also the online virtual class with the 30-day certification. So after the 30-day certification, you're awarded an Innovation Green Belt. And then December 1st through the 3rd, our next program in conjunction with Baldwin Wallace University is Business Continuity and Supply Chain Resiliency. So if you're in the supply chain realm or you're a senior leader wanting to learn about business continuity and supply chain resiliency, how you can set your organizations up for success with continuity planning and supply chain resiliency, join us December 1st through the 3rd. Post today, you will receive a video replay of this webinar. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at info@the-innovation-garage.com. Once again, grateful for you making time and spending it with us, and look forward to seeing you soon, and we'll see you down the road.